This is Jeff Fuller here. I'm just going to give you a SITREP on some of the things that I'm doing today in the fight for freedom and the American way. I'm on my way right now to a thing called the Patriot Pub, which is a very nice venue for weddings and so forth, and it's a catering business west of Leesburg, which has basically become one of the rallying points for the folks, parents and so forth in Loudoun County who are up in arms over the critical race theory business that's going on in the Loudoun schools. I've been to it once before. It was I had an informative program. Tonight they're going to have Ian Pryor, who's leading the Loudoun anti-CRT effort. I'll include his organization in here. I think it's Stop CRT in Our Schools or something like that, but I will include it in the description. Anyway, Ian is a hard-charging parent who is blown the whistle on critical race theory. He's been doing all kinds of things, and I consider him an example to follow. Now, everybody, I think, in Northern Virginia knows that Loudoun County is basically gone completely over the cliff on being all in on critical race theory, followed probably almost as very close behind by Fairfax County schools, and I'm in Prince William County, which is sort of in between, but like at a triangle to the west of Fairfax and south of Loudoun. And Prince William Schools is not as far along as I can tell, but they have had a diversity, equity, and inclusion office running for almost 2 years, as far as I can tell. And they came to my attention when they published an equity statement, and I got wind from a insider on this business that they were having a board meeting to approve it. So myself, my neighbor, and both signed up to speak, and about 14 other people, I believe it was, spoke against this thing, and a couple people spoke for racism in the form of critical race theory. So it was my first foray into the school board business. Well, after that, I started doing research. I've been doing research on the Virginia's Department of Education webpage. I submitted a FOIA request to Department of Education asking for information on correspondence and files, etc., where critical race theory is specifically mentioned. And then I had a couple other terms. It came back saying that it would cost me about $4,700 to do that FOIA, because my search terms would have turned up so much material, which I think says most of what you need to know, and that is that the Virginia government under the Neo-Marxist regime is basically completely overboard and all in on critical race theory. Now, they don't like to call it that anymore because critical race theory has fallen out of favor, because the American people can kind of understand that. I mean, even if you're part of the silent majority, when somebody starts saying that things like in the case of Prince William County Schools equity statement, that because of systemic racism, the staff will be examined for equity biases, and measures will be taken to remediate those biases. Now, when they say assess biases, they usually mean, I've found through research, a test that is basically not valid. In other words, you take it in the morning and you're a racist. You take it in the afternoon and you're not a racist. So there's no validity over time for the results, and it's just an inappropriate vehicle to use to call somebody a racist and to send them to a re-education camp. It sounds remarkably like North Korea or back in my day, North Vietnam. So anyway, I digress. So I'm all fired up about the critical race theory thing, and toward that end, I've been working with a couple different organizations to connect the dots and to support where I can activities and events that are shining the light on this problem. Last Saturday, I went to, with my friend Jim Boothie, who I've gotten to know. I went to basically a Heritage Action Town Hall in Delaware. It was held in a big church, went on for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. But it was a very informative panel, and on the panel was a woman, I'll call her She. It's impossible for me to pronounce her name, but She is her first name. That's spelled X-I. And I think I'll include the link to a couple of her videos. She's an amazing woman who as a young girl was raised in Mao Zedong's communist China. And she came to the United States and she managed to work. She came here legally, as I recall, as a graduate student, and managed to work out a way to stay here. She is, and she told her story in terms of how she sees the parallels between her experiences in communist China and what she sees in the proponents and the actions and activities and policies associated with or related to or based on critical race theory. Critical race theory is basically, for lack of a better term and simplified terms, it's Neo-Marxism. Now, I'm not going to get here. I've been studying it. I can give you the lineage from Marx through Lenin, through Gramsci, the communist who was imprisoned in Italy, to the Frankfurt School, to these same socialists and communists that migrated out of Germany to Columbia University and basically became the central hub of communist teachings. But they migrated it, of course this began when the communist model didn't work and failed so miserably. The intellectual communists had to come up with another explanation, something that would explain why they didn't abandon the concept. They didn't abandon the fact that there has to be an oppressor and an oppressed. But they said what's happened is in more modern societies like England and Germany and so forth, the proletariat, that is the working class, were blinded by the culture that was imposed on them by the oppressor, the oppressive class, so to speak. So, and instead of the oppressor being the upper class or the elite or the bourgeoisie, they decided it was culture in general that was blinding the poor proletariat into not seeing reality. And so towards that end, Gramsci said we have to attack all of the components of the culture and of institutions. That's a pretty heavy lift. And you'd think, well, you've bitten off a lot. Well, that was the late 1920s. His works were published, I think, in 1970 in English. And after that, the critical, well, it was critical theory, then critical legal theory, then critical race theory, and now I think the best way to describe it is critical race theory through the lens of intersectionality. That's kind of the way they say it. In fact, those words can be found in the Prince William County equity statement that they've in the process of approving. So that intersectionality means that you've got to break the population up into oppressors and oppressed. And not all oppressed are equal, and not all oppressors are equal. And this is why I get back to what she said in her comments at that town hall. And I'll include a link to that town hall. It's 2 hours and it's really informative. But in her comments, she said, in communist China, Mao decided that there were 5 classes of oppressors and 5 classes of oppressed. And the oppressors were the black classes, and the oppressed were the red classes. And obviously you wanted to be a red class. And the higher you were on the oppressor scale, the more likely you were to be killed, sent to re-education camp, imprisoned, humiliated. The lower classes would just be humiliated and have to write letters of apology and basically be subjected to scorn by their neighbors. Their kids would change their names so that they wouldn't be associated with them. And so it was truly it was like an Orwellian nightmare. And that's what she said was, this is what she sees now in the way critical race theory adherents are breaking down society into the oppressed and the oppressor. And through intersectionality, they make Mao look like a piker. Mao only had 5 layers of oppressor and 5 layers of oppressed. In intersectionality, if you just take the standard things that they mention, race, sex, sexual identity, wealth status, whether you're abled or unabled, and so forth. You'll see a list of them. In fact, I might also include that in the description. So there's a number of things, and if you think about it, how many races are there? Well, I came up with 6. You could probably come up with 20, but I came up with 6 that are mentioned: white, black, brown, indigenous peoples, and so forth, Asian. So I came up with those, and I put it all on a spreadsheet, and I multiplied the number of classes of society that are mentioned by the Neo-Marxists, and then I took the number of possible cases and I multiplied those out. There are 32,400 different intersections between those different descriptions. In other words, you could perhaps the highest oppressed person would be a female who transitioned to male, who was in a wheelchair, disabled, and was a black and was black. That person might, and obviously as a transsexual, that's a specially favored sexual identity class. So that person would be probably the very most favored in terms of when you're allocating power and resources. You would go to that person first. And the last person that you'd go to is a straight, male, white Christian. Oh, I forgot to mention religion. There's also favored religions. So anyway, you get the idea. When you're sitting here at the table and you're allocating resources, let's say you've got 10 new jobs to allocate for teachers in Prince William County, and you look at the distribution of your current workforce compared to the distribution of the students, and you find that you have women underserved or women overserved. There's more women than men by distribution of population, but there's fewer blacks than whites, and so forth. And then you'd find, much to your chagrin, that there's not enough Asian teachers, given that you have a fairly large population of Asians. So when you start working the intersectionality matrix from hell, some things work out that aren't necessarily what you would want. That's why they don't go very far down into the weeds, because if you're sitting at the table allocating those 10 jobs, by the statistics, you might have to give one of them to a Asian man. Well, how many Asian men are teachers? You have a fairly small pool, perhaps, of Asian men that are teachers. So you're going to have to dip in there pretty hard and drag somebody out of that may not be as qualified or experienced, but you've got to get that distribution equity, equal outcomes. So you got to keep pushing on the scales through the mechanisms that you have for coming up with staffing and so forth, so that you get a better distribution. Now, when you do this with, say, bricklayers in the United States, men are something like 99% bricklayers. You don't hear clamoring from the Neo-Marxists for we've got to get bricklayer jobs spread out 50-50. Well, why aren't there 50% of the bricklayers that are females or transsexuals or whatever? So you see, that doesn't work. The only way they want the intersectional matrix to work is not on that kind of equity, but on equity of power and things that are desired. So you take the things that are desired and power and you distribute it to those that are lower on the oppression scale. But the way that works in history is Stalin tried it. I think it was 5 million people in Ukraine died of starvation as a result of his elimination of the slightly prosperous kulaks, who were the farmers that had something, had their act together and could actually get a plow and a couple horses together and were more prosperous than their neighbors. They were all gone. So he got rid of everybody that knew anything about how to farm successfully, and 5 million people later dead. No remorse. No remorse. So these things don't end up well, at least in history. And anybody who tells you, well, Stalin didn't do it right, or Castro didn't do it right, or the Khmer Rouge didn't do it right. They tried to apply communism, but they wouldn't have applied it as cleverly and with great empathy and understanding as I would, or as our group of enlightened neo-Marxist intellectuals would. Anybody who says that is, as Jordan Peterson says, not only a fool, but a narcissistic fool. And that's where we're at. So enough said. Let me just finish the rest of my report. I've been working with my friend Kimberly, who's a fellow district captain in Convention Estates. And she and I have been collaborating and working with our other leaders in the outfit we call Northern Virginia North to put on an event on the 24th of August in the Fairfax City Library at 7 p.m. Now, this is aimed at the Northern Virginia audience, and what we're doing is highlighting two issues that probably are at least in the top 3 of everybody's list. One of them is critical race theory, which I've been talking about in the schools, and we've got a woman who's a former school board member in Fairfax, Elizabeth Schultz, who's going to be speaking to us about not only what the Fairfax County schools did with critical race theory, but also what she and other patriots are doing to stomp this stuff out. They're running a recall election on several members of the board, and that process is going along nicely. Now, in Virginia, it's not easy to recall somebody. First, you got to get a certain number of signatures, get them verified, and then once you get the number and they're verified, then a judge decides whether the person that you've recalled is worthy of dismissal. But the process of doing it has activated a lot of people who would otherwise not be active in this election. So I think it bodes well for let's just say the silent majority that's been sitting on their ass, a few of them soccer moms and dads get up off their butt and get into the fight, at least as it's relating to this neo-Marxist movement in schools. So that's one person to speak, and the other person is a guy I met recently, who's his name is Rob Pressler, and he's running a action to basically get people to sign a petition to demand a recount of the 2020 election. Well, he calls it a forensic audit, which is what we want. We don't need another recount. And so he's going to come and he's going to make his case for why that's a good idea, in spite of the fact we don't control the legislature. But I'm supporting it because, again, I think it activates people. It gets them excited, and it'll, I hope, inspire them not only to vote, but to, not like the Democrats, vote 20 times, but just vote and get their neighbors, friends, and family out to vote. And maybe do some things to help with the candidates that they favor in terms of the election. So that's pretty much it. Now the other, I'm doing a couple other things. I'm working with the gentleman I mentioned, Jim Boothby, runs a coalition of what I call mid-Atlantic conservative groups, from all the way from West Virginia to Washington, D.C. and so forth. We have people like Freedom Works, Heritage Action, and a few smaller outfits that are all conservative, all concerned, and agreeing to band together to promote where we can each other's actions and so forth and activities. They've got a couple of great initiatives. I won't go into detail, but the one I want to share with you that we're working on is a program. It'll be a series of 5, let's call them educational town halls, not too dissimilar from what was done by Heritage Action, but it'll be Heritage Action took off a big bite. They decided to address critical race theory in schools, in businesses, in the military, and across the entire, the culture and the institutions. And it was a big lift, and it covered a lot of territory, and it was very informative. So what we've decided to do is get some folks together who come from communist countries like Chile and several other women and men who have experience living in communist countries. And our idea is to basically do a series of town halls starting with education and compare the experiences of Americans. In the case of education, it'll be mostly American moms, since they're the most active in this fight against CRT, and what their experiences are, and then the communist, former communist raised women will talk about how those experiences resonate based on their experience with communism. So we're pretty excited about that. We don't have a date or venue. We're still in the concept stages, but I'm working to help that process along. And I'll obviously have more about that when we have, some of the stuff sticks on the wall and we bring form out of the various ideas that we've been kicking around. But I think that's promising. And basically, what the Chinese ladies have told us is we need to counterattack on the American cultural revolution that's being run by the neo-Marxists. They kind of consider it a counter-cultural revolution, and they want to deal with it at the cultural level, not necessarily the political level, although they recognize there are political implications for that. But they believe, and I accept their reasoning on this, that American patriots, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, independents, or are just not involved, need to hear the truth, hear their experience, and make their judgment about whether this is the direction they want the country to go. And if it is, fine. If it's not, then they will have a call for action that says you need to get up and act and do things to, watch your school board if you have a school board that hasn't been infected, or get rid of them and get a new school board. Get rid of these racist superintendents and administrators, and start purging these people out of American life. It's going to be hard. This isn't going to be done in a year, a few years. It's going to be. It's taken them almost 50 years to do this to us, and it's going to take a significant amount of time and effort to get it done. But I'm a veteran, and I'm saying that every veteran who served has swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States has got to join this fight. And I don't mean just rah, 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 and a few likes on Facebook. I'm talking about get off your butt and get involved, be a leader, and so forth. And for those that didn't serve, everybody that didn't serve had an uncle that did, or a grandfather that did, or a father that did, and out of respect for the service that they had, and the ones that didn't come home especially, everybody that's got some capability, whether it's writing or speaking or organizing or politicking, whatever it is, you need to run for school board, you need to run for county commissioner, or you need to support those, find those, and get those that can do it and should do it to do it, and change things. That's what I'm saying. So I've sort of rambled around. I've got a couple other things on my mind, but I won't go into those too much. I won't wait for them to come to fruition. One of the most interesting is I did a FOIA request. I'll just finish on this. I did a FOIA request of the Prince William County Schools, and I asked for only one thing, because I'd found out it was going to be, again, it was going to cost me thousands of dollars to do a broader one. So I narrowed it down. I narrowed the time frame. I narrowed the word search to critical race theory, just critical race theory. And I narrowed the time to just 1 year instead of several years. And I think I narrowed it in a couple other ways. And it cost me $168. I got about 20 documents. 19 of them were basically worthless. But one of them was a very revealing text message. And I'm not going to go into it anymore because I don't want to spill the beans. But it was an interesting text message, let's put it that way. And I am working on how to best leverage that for the cause. But if I had my way, I'll tell you a priori, my way would be to, if it makes the cut, I would consider using it to do a recall on the person that was involved. So you got to do that. Then, and there's a lot of good information now coming up online about how to do a FOIA request. There's Heritage Action has a whole thing, a school board and schools. I don't know what they call it, but it's like a workbook with all kinds of additional information. So go on Heritage Action and search for schools. You'll find a whole section on that. So I consider Heritage Action a very useful organization in this fight, and they've been doing good work. So I'm getting closer to my destination, which is Patriot Pub. I may include a video. I might attach a video at the end of this with a little bit of my experience at Patriot Pub. But for now, I'll sign off. Stay faithful in the fight for liberty, and be happy warriors. We have no choice but to win this fight. Good night.